awesome is that? That is Aleinu, the final prayer of every prayer service. But the Moshav band taking it to a whole other level. Hey, hey, hey. So cool. A little bit of a Native American sound, and that is a good intersection with what we're learning today. When is a sukkah like a teepee? How you doing, my holy sisters and brothers? Let's light up the darkness. That prayer, by the way, Aleinu, is the final prayer of every Jewish prayer service and the most universal of all the Jewish prayers. Looking forward to that day when the whole world recognizes God as the creator of the world, and we will all, the whole world will be, meaning all the people in the world, will be as filled with knowledge of the Lord as water fills the sea. Who's with us as we do some beautiful learning on a Tuesday night? Stephen in New Hampshire, Pauline in Arkansas, Yehudit in South Carolina, Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey, John in Maine, Melissa in Great Neck, James in Indianapolis, Rebecca in LA, Christo in Lubbock, John in Sedona, Michael in Scranton, Tom says Shavua Tov, Gwen in Michigan, Paul in the Great Northeast, Renee in Indiana, Bill in Missouri. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, Climella Box in San Francisco Bay Area. New name, welcome. Great to have you with us. Jim in New Hampshire, Stephen in Oklahoma, Timothy in Arizona, Nancy in North Carolina. Paula likes the goatee. Nina likes the goatee too. And I got to tell you, the Talmud says elsewhere that the beauty of a man's face is the beard. I would have a big full beard. Probably if I could, but whenever I grow a beard, I cannot get past the itchy phase. And everyone says, just hold on, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, it'll stop itching. I don't know, maybe I'm just too sensitive. It grows in on itself. I comb it, I try treatments. I cannot grow a beard. But this part, just on the chin, seems to be working for me. So I'm going to be able to hang on to that for a while, God willing. So thank you. Sandy from Michigan, Rudy from Paraguay. Bienvenido, Rudy. Qué bueno que estás con nosotros. David says that the Aleinu was illegal in Europe for a while. I don't know that story. I want to learn more. Belle says, thank you for your teaching. And Christo says, I love how the synagogue ark is traditionally open to view the Torah scrolls during the Aleinu. Paul is correcting me, the Great Northwest. That's what I thought. I thought maybe you flew across the country or something. And Christo says, my beard never grows evenly, so I doubt I will ever grow it out again. Welcome, everybody. Over there on the YouTube side, Gigi says shalom, Lynn in North Texas, and Aoife, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name right, but Aoife Ayla, hello from Ocala, Florida. Welcome, great to have you with us. All right, we're going to be touching on 3 different Mishnayos today, so we better get to it. Where are we holding? This is Daf Yud Tes, page 19 here in Tractate Sukkah. There's about 56 pages, I believe, in this tractate. So we're approaching the halfway point. We're still in chapter 1 of 5 chapters. This is the 7th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of Sukkot. The first chapter is all about the requirements of the Sukkah itself. We're finishing up our discussion of Mishnah number 11, which is talking all about what happens when the appropriate roofing of the sukkah, the schach, this natural material that grew from the ground and hasn't been fashioned into some kind of utensil or vessel, so it's not susceptible to ritual impurity. What happens if it's distanced from the edge of the sukkah? We've been studying those rules for a while. Here at the beginning of page 19, we're just going to summarize And the sages were looking at another body of law. Already we've talked a few times about Tractate Eruvin and the laws of creating a private domain within the public domain where carrying would be permitted on Shabbos, and whether or not we can apply some of those laws to the sukkah. Generally not. It's difficult to apply those laws because the whole concept of an Eruv is basically a rabbinic fix for prohibitions created by a rabbinic decree. And so the laws are going to be a little bit more lenient in that area than the laws of a sukkah, which is a Torah requirement. It's a Torah requirement that we dwell in the sukkah during Sukkah. And so the laws are going to be more stringent. So one question was, if you have a portico, like that's out in the public domain, out in the field, so you just have 4 posts, let's say, and a roof. There's no walls. There's no partitions. Can you carry under that roof, inside that portico? It feels like an indoor area because there's a roof over it. You're out of the sun. It like feels like a place where you should be able to carry. For example, if there was a buffet out there, you could carry food from the buffet table to your table. So, but there are no partitions, there's no walls, there's only the 4 corner posts. In that situation, you can carry because the sages say the edges of the roof, of that portico roof, extend downward and seal, meaning the edges of the roof define where the walls are, and therefore that is thought to be an indoor structure, and you can carry there even though there are no actual walls. So then the sages start to look at applying that body of law to a sukkah. If, for example, you have a whole bunch of unfit roofing, like where you took a courtyard of a house and there was a portico there was some kind of, like, let's say a canvas top over the courtyard, a 3-sided house, like a house that extends, like a long house with 2 wings, so the courtyard that's left in the middle of that, like, C shape, and then there was canvas over the whole top of it, so it's not a fit sukkah. But then let's say you made a hole in the canvas and you put proper sukkah materials there, roofing materials for a sukkah, like branches and twigs and palm leaves. And then the rule is, well, if the part of the canvas portico that you left up, if it's more than 4 cubits wide, then none of this is going to work as a sukkah. So then the question was asked, well, but why don't we think of it as the edge of the canvas part of the portico is like it extends downward and seals. So it's as if only the part that has the valid schach, the valid sukkah roofing in the middle of that courtyard, at least that should count as a sukkah. And the answer is no, it doesn't extend down and seal as if the walls of the outer walls of the house started right there. Because, the schach continues the portico, and it is unclear maybe where one begins and one ends. Even though it's visually clear, that's not going to work. And so, as we've seen before, you can only have 4 cubits of that portico extension from the walls of the house. It's as if it's a curved wall, and as long as it's less than 4 cubits, then the part where the schach begins, the appropriate roofing of the sukkah, will make the courtyard into a sukkah, but you can only eat or sleep under the fit roofing, not under the unfit roofing. Okay, that was the beginning that we're not going into in detail of our page. And now we pick it up a little bit further down on 19a, and it says, it was taught in the Tosefta, fit roofing that consists of different kinds of agricultural waste products that extend from the sukkah has the legal status like that of the sukkah. And the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of waste products that extend from the sukkah? And Ula said, branches that extend behind the sukkah and are not limited to the area within the sukkah walls. So it's a little counterintuitive when we hear this waste products. We're thinking, well, the sukkah is a very holy structure. We're commanded to dwell in it to fulfill a Torah obligation. What do you mean waste products? Don't we want like a beautiful sukkah roof? And the answer is no. The waste products are the correct roofing, meaning the waste products from the threshing floor or the waste products from the wine press, right? not grain, not the little branches that hold the grain, but rather the full stalks of the grain, or the vines of the grapevine, not the grapes themselves. Or as we've seen, palm branches, palm leaves, just any kinds of branches, twigs, sticks, leaves, all that stuff that you cut from the ground or cut from a tree. It's no longer alive. And you use that, you drape it over the beams or whatever is going to hold it up. That is proper schach, proper roofing for a sukkah. Now, the question that's being asked here, that this case of the Tosefta, is basically, magic markers go here. Right, so you have a sukkah. All right, this is a very bad rectangle, but this is a sukkah overhead view. You're looking down on the sukkah, okay? And then you've got all kinds of palm branches, leaves, twigs, sticks, etc. That's a proper sukkah with proper roofing, as long as it has more shade than sunlight. What if it extends beyond the edge of the sukkah? Right? It overhangs, and it overhangs by quite a bit. What about this extra area? Is it a sukkah? Does that area under, that hangs over the edge of the sukkah, does it somehow count as a sukkah? That's what we're asking. The Gemara asks, but don't we require 3 walls to render an area covered with roofing a fit sukkah? And the Gemara answers, this is referring to a case where there are 3 walls. The 2 side walls of the sukkah do not end at the middle wall between them. Rather, they too extend. And so now we start to understand what is the case. What we have is 2 parallel walls. And whereas we usually think of a sukkah that we would put the 3rd wall there, and then we could leave that side open. That's fine. You only need 3 walls for a sukkah. In fact, one of the walls only needs to be a 1 handbreadth, right? So even that would actually be a valid sukkah, because you have this 1 handbreadth wall down here. But that's not the case that we're discussing. The case that we're discussing here is where you have a wall there, okay? So now, and then you put the schach over it. So you've got all kinds of nice schach here, and it extends like that. But remember, there's an actual wall inside there, inside the sukkah. So this is definitely a valid sukkah. This was just kind of an extra area, but what do we see? It has 3 walls and proper roofing over it. Is this another sukkah, a valid sukkah? The answer is yes, but we're not going to get there so easily or quickly. So the Gemara says, but don't we require 7 by 7 handbreadths as the minimum area for the fitness of a sukkah? And the Gemara answers, yeah, we have 7 by 7 handbreadths. So this extra little sukkah in here is more than the minimum measure, 7 by 7 handbreadths, okay? So it has 3 walls, it has fit roofing, it's more than 7 by 7 handbreadths. Says the Gemara, but don't we require that its shade exceeds its sunlight? The Gemara answers, we're referring to a case where its shade exceeds its sunlight. So after noting that the sukkah has 3 walls, the requisite area, and sufficient shade, the Gemara asks, if so, what purpose is there to state this law? The fact that this sukkah extends from another sukkah is not relevant. And the Gemara answers, nevertheless, there is a novel element in this halacha, a chiddush, something new that was stated here, right? Because it seems like it didn't need to be said, because we know that if a sukkah has 3 walls, proper roofing, the shade exceeds the sunlight, it's more than 7 by 7 handbreadths, it's a sukkah. Why do we need to state this? And the answer is because when the guy built his sukkah, he put up these 2 walls, or let's say they were already existing walls, and then he wanted to make a sukkah here. Now, he could have just made the whole thing a sukkah, but for whatever reason, it was a little too big. He wanted a little cozier, more intimate sukkah. So he put this 3rd wall here so that this area is the kind of the right size sukkah for him and his family and what he needs. Incidentally, he also created this other sukkah back here, this extra sukkah, a second sukkah. Now, since it was not his intent to create this second sukkah, we might well ask, this, accidental sukkah that was created, is it a valid sukkah? Maybe it isn't because there was no intent to create it. The answer is, it might be incidental, it might be accidental, but it was created by somebody who set out to create a sukkah. And therefore, they're both valid sukkahs. That's a valid sukkah, and that is a valid sukkah as well. After noting that the yes. So Ula teaches us that the initial intention of only creating one sukkah is not relevant. The second sukkah is a valid sukkah also. We skip down a little bit further. They're going to argue this back and forth a little bit, but that's the law. The second sukkah is a sukkah. And that actually completes our discussion of Mishnah number 11 here in chapter 1. And now we go to Mishnah number 12. One who establishes his sukkah like a type of circular hut with no roof, whose walls slope down, it has no roof, and its walls slope down from the center, or one who rested the sukkah against the wall by taking long branches and placing one end on the ground and leaning the other end against the wall to establish a structure with no roof, Rabbi Eliezer deems it unfit because it does not have a roof. And the rabbis deem it fit, as in their opinion, the roof and the walls may be a single entity indistinguishable from each other. All right, so first let's talk about what is the structure that they're talking about. They're talking about two different structures. The first one is going to be like this. And this will look, somewhat familiar to anyone who's seen, Westerns, right? So this is a teepee, right? So now a teepee, like the way that Native Americans live in them, would not be a valid sukkah because the walls are made out of, some kind of utensil vessel, like canvas. It's like a woven material or animal hide. Either way, not valid schach for the sukkah. But if you made this kind of triangular round structure that essentially has no roof, that's the key. There is no roof. It only has inclined walls. If you made those inclined walls out of proper material, branches, twigs, etc., so then Rabbi Eliezer would say it's unfit, according to our Mishnah, because it has no roof. And the rabbis disagree with Rabbi Eliezer and say it is a fit sukkah as long as the walls are made out of schach, because they're going to count as a type of roof. The second example is like this. Where you have the ground and a vertical wall, and then you make a lean-to. You just put all your schach kind of like this, inclined, like one side of the teepee, and essentially, but we're just looking at a cross section, so this leaning material could extend, as whatever length you want. But just seen from the side, you've got the ground, you've got a vertical wall, and then you've got this inclined schach, inclined roofing, which Rabbi Eliezer would say, well, no, that's really a wall, not a roof. Therefore, it's not a fit sukkah. And the rabbis disagree and say it's over your head. It's made out of schach, proper material. So it is a valid sukkah. That's the argument that we're discussing here in Mishnah number 12. Now, what's interesting about this discussion is we're going to see here that even though it's a Mishnah, meaning it's authoritative and it should be the law, it's going to disagree with a baraisa, right? The baraisas are contemporaneous with the Mishnah, and generally if a Mishnah contradicts a baraisa, it means that the Mishnah is correct and the baraisa is wrong, because the Mishnah was more authoritative and it was compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. But there are some cases where there seems to be enough evidence, even among the sages themselves, even among Tanaim, sages of the Mishnaic period, who say, no, actually the Mishnah got it wrong. and the Baraisa, which disagrees with it, is the correct version. That's going to be one of those rare cases. Here's the Gemara on Mishnah number 12. It was taught in a Baraisa. Rabbi Eliezer concedes that if one lifted one of these types of sukkahs off the ground at least one handbreadth, thereby creating a vertical wall, or if one distanced the sukkah resting against the wall one handbreadth from the wall, then the sukkah is fit. So this is quite interesting. Rabbi Eliezer is saying that in the case of the teepee type shape, right, this kind of cone, that if you lifted it one handbreadth off the ground, or you created some kind of a vertical barrier that's at least one handbreadth at the bottom of the cone structure, then it will be valid. Because at that point, even though the wall is only one handbreadth high, it's clearly a wall, and then this whole cone-shaped structure is the ceiling, right? He's willing to say, okay, well then it really is like roofing, and so therefore this is going to count as a sukkah. Even though the wall itself is only one handbreadth, you might think, well, that doesn't work. A sukkah has to be at least 10 handbreadths high. But it is. It's much more than 10 handbreadths high. It's just that it's inclined for all of its height. But what you need is a clear distinction between what is serving as the roofing and what could be called the wall. Likewise, in the lean-to situation, Rabbi Eliezer would admit that if there was at least one handbreadth of vertical here, or at least one handbreadth of horizontal there, if it was horizontal, I'm not even sure why that would work, because that's called the roof, but that's not the roof. This is the schach. But it definitely, the vertical would make sense, because then you've got the same situation as in the teepee type structure, that the schach is now elevated and it more formally seems like roofing. What is the rationale for the opinion of the rabbis who deem a sukkah fit even where it is an inclined roof rather than a flat one? And the Gemara answers, in their opinion, the legal status of the incline of a tent is like that of a tent. As long as it provides shelter, there is no need for a distinct, conspicuous roof for it to be a fit sukkah. Now, this is actually a little bit surprising. Why? Because we remember not too many Mishnayos ago that we were talking about somebody who is sleeping inside his sukkah, right? This is the schach. And over his bed, let's say he has what's called a bridal canopy, or he has a four-poster bed. If he has a four-poster bed and then you stretch some material, some kind of textile, some kind of cloth across the four posts above the bed, this person, if he sleeps in that bed inside his sukkah, has not fulfilled his obligation to dwell in the sukkah, because he's not sleeping under the roof of the sukkah. He's sleeping under the canopy above his bed. And they said that's going to be true even if it's kind of an A-frame canopy, right, for his bed. So kind of like this, right? If this is his bed inside the sukkah, so if he's got a flat part at the top of that canopy, then that is a roof. He's sleeping under a roof, under a tent essentially, and he's not sleeping under the roof of the sukkah. He has not fulfilled his obligation. But we also said that if he's got, for example, mosquito netting arranged over his bed, and this is less than one handbreadth at the top of the incline, like a true A-frame of a canopy over his bed, then he has fulfilled his obligation, because that's not a roof. This is just two walls. So even though it sort of covers him, it's not considered a significant roof. So he is sleeping under the schach, under the proper roofing of his sukkah. Based on that principle, we would think that a sukkah, which is shaped like a teepee, an A shape, which is all where the sides are made of schach, it should not work, right? It should not work because there's no roof. We've already said that where there's two inclined sides, there's no roof. So now if the two inclined sides are made out of the roofing material, out of the schach of the sukkah, that really shouldn't count as a sukkah because you haven't slept under a roof made of the appropriate roofing materials of a sukkah. So why are the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Eliezer saying that that teepee-shaped sukkah is a fit sukkah? It is related. Abaye found Rav Yosef, his teacher, who was sleeping inside a netted bridal canopy whose netting inclines down, right? So the A-framed canopy over the bed inside the sukkah. Ostensibly, Rav Yosef did not fulfill his obligation as he slept in the tent formed by the canopy and not directly in the sukkah. So Abaye said to him, in accordance with whose opinion do you hold that you do not consider this netting a tent? Says Rav Yosef, Abaye continues, is it in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who maintains that a structure without a distinct roof does not have the legal status of a tent, and therefore the netting does not constitute a barrier between the roofing of the sukkah and the person sleeping below? But remember, so that's our Mishnah, where Rabbi Eliezer says an A-frame sukkah, A-frame-shaped sukkah, is not fit. And the rabbis, the majority who disagree with Rabbi Eliezer, say that it is fit. So if Rav Yosef is sleeping inside his sukkah on a bed under a canopy that's an A-frame, and he's saying that that A-frame does not count as a roof, so that would be in accordance with Eliezer's opinion. But Eliezer was the minority, so you can't rely on Eliezer's opinion. You have to rely on the rabbis, the majority, and they said that the A-frame is a structure. If the A-frame is a structure, then that netting over his bed is a structure. If that is a structure, a significant structure, then he's sleeping under that significant structure and not sleeping under the schach, the roofing of his sukkah. And so he hasn't fulfilled his obligation. That's Abaye's question to Rav Yosef. And so Rav Yosef said to him, in the Baraisa, right, this other formulation of the law which disagrees with our Mishnah, in the Baraisa, the opposite is taught. Rabbi Eliezer deems the A-frame sukkah fit, and the rabbis deem it unfit. Abaye asked him, did you abandon the Mishnah, whose formulation is authoritative, in order to act in accordance with the Baraisa, which may not be as accurate? Rav Yosef said to him, I have proof that the formulation of this particular Baraisa is precise, as the formulation of the Mishnah is an individual version of the dispute, and most of the sages adopt the version of the Baraisa. As it is taught in a second Baraisa, one who establishes his sukkah like a type of circular hut, like a teepee, or rests the sukkah roofing against the wall like a lean-to. Rabbi Nassan says that Rabbi Eliezer deems the structure unfit because it does not have a roof, and the rabbis deem it fit. Apparently, the Mishnah reflects only Rabbi Nassan's version of the argument. According to most of the sages, the correct formulation of the dispute is that of the Baraisa. Rabbi Eliezer deems it fit, and the rabbis deem it unfit. And that is why you can sleep in an A-frame, A-shaped canopy over your bed inside the sukkah, and you're fulfilling your obligation, but you cannot make a teepee-shaped sukkah that has no roof at all. It would be unfit according to the opinion of the majority of the sages. And indeed, that is the halacha. A sukkah that lacks a roof, e.g., a sukkah that is circular or whose walls rest against a vertical wall, is unfit. Circular meaning, and the sides just end in a point, like a teepee. However, if the sukkah has a roof that measures a single handbreadth, so it can be an A-frame shape, like a teepee shape, as long as at the top there's at least some horizontal area, even one handbreadth. So it's totally like a teepee. You just got to make sure that at the top there's a horizontal area that's at least one handbreadth wide. Then the sukkah is fit. And this ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Rav Yosef, who had a variant reading of the Mishnah. In his version, the opinions are reversed, so that this opinion is actually the majority opinion. Some say that it is not sufficient to have the wall elevated 1 handbreadth off the ground. Rather, this single handbreadth must be part of either the wall or the roofing. And the sukkah must be 7 by 7 handbreadths and 10 handbreadths high. So there you go. Even if it extends away from the wall, it works. Even if it's unfit roofing, because as we've seen, unfit roofing only invalidates a sukkah if there's 4 handbreadths of it. So it can even be unfit roofing, but it establishes that there's a horizontal up there, and then you could either have the teepee shape or the lean-to shape, but you got to have a horizontal area at the top. I'm almost done, so if you've got questions or comments, get them in. So we just concluded, actually, our discussion of Mishnah number 12, and now we open our discussion of Mishnah number 13. In the case of a large mat of reeds, if one initially produced it for the purpose of lying upon it, it is susceptible to ritual impurity like any other vessel or utensil, and therefore one may not roof a sukkah with it. We've already seen this Mishnah, we've discussed it, but now the Mishnah itself is being laid out in our tractate. If one initially produced it for roofing, one may roof a sukkah with it, and it is not susceptible to ritual impurity, as its legal status is not that of a vessel. Rabbi Eliezer says that the distinction between the mats is based on use, not size. Therefore, with regard to both a small mat and a large mat, if one produced it for the purpose of lying on it, so then it's a utensil that has another use, it is susceptible to ritual impurity, and you can't use it as roofing for a sukkah. On the other hand, if you took a bunch of reeds that grew from the ground, you cut them, you kind of weave them together into a mat, and your goal was to create roofing for the sukkah, then it's okay. Then you are able to use that reed mat as the roofing for a sukkah. According to Rabbi Eliezer, it doesn't matter what size it was. If you did it for the purpose of roofing, it's good for roofing. If you did it for the purpose of lying on it, it's a utensil, and you can't use it as roofing on the sukkah. According to the rabbis in the majority, if it's large, we assume it's made for roofing. Unless you designated it for lying on, then you can sleep on it. If it's small, if you didn't say anything about it, we assume that it was made for sleeping, and you can't use it as roofing for a sukkah. But if you designated it to be roofing for a sukkah, even if it's small, then you can use it as roofing for the sukkah. And the Gemara analyzes the formulation of this Mishnah and raises a difficulty. This Mishnah itself is difficult, as it contains an apparent contradiction. On the one hand, you said if one produced it for the purpose of lying upon it, it is susceptible to ritual impurity, and one may not roof a sukkah with it. And the reason that it is unfit for roofing is due to the fact that one produced it specifically for the purpose of lying upon it. So therefore, presumably, a mat produced without designation, you didn't say what it was for, is for roofing, and therefore one may roof a sukkah with it. But then it is taught in the Mishnah, if one produced it for roofing, one may roof a sukkah with it, and it is not susceptible to ritual impurity. Okay, so the reason that it is fit roofing is due to the fact that one produced it specifically for roofing. You designated it for roofing. This implies that a mat that one produced without designation, you didn't say what it was for, is presumably for the purpose of lying upon it, and therefore one may not roof a sukkah with it. So the inferences drawn from these two clauses in the Mishnah about a mat produced without designation contradict each other. And the Gemara answers, La Kasha, it is not difficult. Here in the first clause of the Mishnah, it is referring to a large mat, which is typically not produced for the purpose of lying upon it. Therefore, it is unfit for roofing only if it is produced specifically for the purpose of lying upon it. If it is produced without designation, it is presumably for roofing, and one may roof a sukkah with it. There, in the second clause of the Mishnah, it's referring to a small mat, which is typically not produced for roofing. Therefore, one may not roof a sukkah with it. Therefore, one may roof a sukkah with it only if it was designated specifically to become roofing. If it is produced without designation, since it's small, it is presumably for the purpose of lying upon it, and therefore, one may not roof the sukkah with it. That's what I've got for today. Let us go to your comments and questions. Tom, what if you didn't intend to create any sukkah, but accidentally created one or two? If they nevertheless fulfill all the requirements, is it or are they valid sukkahs? So we had this question, right? Because see, if you didn't intend to create a sukkah, well, what were you doing? You were creating some other kind of structure. And we've already established some weeks ago that if you have some other structure, that the way that it's built fulfills the requirements of a sukkah. So the problem is that you didn't prepare it to be a sukkah, right? You didn't build it to be a sukkah. And the Torah, the formulation, this verse in the Torah says, prepare for yourselves a sukkah to dwell in it during Sukkot. So you didn't do that. So what we saw was that there was a different requirement according to Beis Hillel or Beis Shammai. Some say that you have to just rearrange the roofing on the top. Some say, I forget what it was. The question is if it was cut. Like if some of the schach was attached to the ground. But in any case, I think we had the law that what you need to do is do something. You have to take some kind of an action. Either separate the boards or rearrange the boards, right? So if the structure that you built for some other purpose accidentally fulfills all the requirements of a sukkah, and now you'd like to use it as a sukkah, you need to do something to it in order to render it a fit sukkah. Just rearrange some of the roofing or something like that so that now you can say, I prepared this structure to be a sukkah. You didn't have to do much. All you had to do was rearrange some of the roofing that's already there, but you have to do some kind of a definitive action to render the sukkah fit. Unlike the case that we studied today, where he intended to build a sukkah, what was accidental was just that he built an extra sukkah in that sort of backside. Okay, so that was the product of building a sukkah. And that's why, even though he didn't really do anything specifically to make that backside, since it was in the process of creating a sukkah, according to Ula, as we've learned, that second sukkah is valid as well. Tom, second question. If you fulfill the obligation to dwell in the sukkah every year, but one year you don't, and then you do fulfill it every year after that, how bad a violation is it? What is the penalty? Well, right, so I think if you don't fulfill the obligation, does this amount to kares? Like that soul shall be cut off from its people. I'm not sure, I don't remember exactly, but it sounds like it might be kares if you don't fulfill the obligation of a sukkah, if you just ignore it intentionally, basically, right? Because you knew that you were supposed to do it and you didn't do it. But there's lots of things that we do, sometimes like we violate Shabbos, we make a decision, we violate Shabbos, and, obviously heaven doesn't strike us with lightning at that very moment. And so what I would say to you is, basically we've all committed many averas, many sins, intentional sins, unintentional sins, negligent sins, inadvertent sins. And what the sages say about that is that, how are we judged? We're judged by all of our actions, right? So we have lots of negatives weighing against us in the heavenly court and lots of positives, that our angel advocate can use in our favor. And then, God does this balancing. And then at the decree of what's going to happen to us in the coming year, right? Which is basically issued at Rosh Hashanah, and then it's supposed to be sealed at Yom Kippur, but it's not. It's like the gates remain like a crack open, and then even through Sukkot, we can still influence the decree for the coming year. Okay, so we engage in all that teshuvah when we examine our deeds in Elul. That's next month, the month before the first month of the year, which begins with Rosh Hashanah. We examine our deeds, and we really determine to do better. We pray so hard at Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, through all that, the days of awe, etc. And hopefully God, who is incredibly merciful and has shown that, will decide, that we still have a lot left to give. And our bad deeds haven't piled up high enough that we should have our life shortened, and we'll get another year and more further opportunities to do teshuvah. So the bottom line is we've all done things wrong. We should acknowledge that. We should feel a sense of holy shame about it, meaning we know we did wrong and we resolve to do better, and then that's it. Because what my friend Rabbi Shlomo Schwartz used to say, the worst thing is crippling guilt, crippling shame. We should never let the fact that we've done misdeeds in the past sort of depress us and make us think that we're irredeemable, because we're never irredeemable. We can always, get another chance and do better and pray for help and strength to do better in the future. So I don't think there's any answer of what the specific penalty is that you missed it 1 year. I think for missing it any time, it's a chorus penalty, but you can make an atonement and you can get yourself, back in God's good graces if you acknowledge what you've done and resolve to do better, and then you in fact do better next time. Evelyn, can you use a tent as a sukkah? So no, right? A tent doesn't work because the essential component is the schach, is the problem. Can you take a tent and modify it so that it would work as a sukkah? Probably, yeah, right? And what would you have to do? Lop off the top and then cover that tent with proper material that works as roofing for a sukkah, like palm branches and leaves and twigs and branches, etc., reeds, bamboo slats, etc., stuff like that you cut from the ground, and then you would use the walls of the tent as the sides of the sukkah. But the top can't be a woven material like canvas made out of thread, processed, right? It has to really be much more natural than that. We're talking about a woven reed mat, but that's really like just cut reeds that are kind of interlaced. It's not any kind of tight weaving made on a loom. Okay, Yosef, have we already covered making a sukkah out of pre-existing structures? Yes. And how to make it a kosher sukkah. So if so, which daf was it discussed in? I don't remember the number. I'm sorry. But it was basically that idea that you'd have to rearrange the boards, right? And that was the distinction between Beis Hillel just said it's enough. What was it? It was enough to open the space or rearrange them. And Beis Shammai said you had to do both, right? That was the essence of the argument. But the point was you had to take an action. If you have a structure that really qualifies as a sukkah, for instance, like you built a sukkah last year and you never took it down, that's a sukkah. But to fulfill your obligation this year, ideally you should rearrange something in it so that you prepared it to fulfill your obligation this year. Welcome, new viewer, Carrie A. Bauman Ankney. Great to have you with us. Jewish and new to Jewish learning. And Carrie asks, what if you can't make a sukkah? And so we've talked about this a couple times. So if you can't make a sukkah, it's just not feasible, it's not physically possible, you don't have a place to do it. It's nice to try to find a place, even a public place that might allow you to build a sukkah, but sometimes it's simply not possible. So then you should try to somehow wrangle an invitation to get to a sukkah and have a meal there. And if you don't know anybody that has a sukkah, it's still possible because you can go to services at a synagogue on Shabbos during Sukkot, and they're surely going to have a sukkah at the synagogue. And then they're going to serve some refreshments after the morning service at the Kiddush. And then you can eat some food in the sukkah. Or you can go to a kosher restaurant that's open during Sukkot. Almost all kosher restaurants that are open during Sukkot have a sukkah outside, and you can order some food and eat it in the sukkah, and then you can recite your blessing for dwelling in the sukkah, and then your blessing over the food, and then eat the food, and then you have fulfilled your obligation to dwell in the sukkah. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Tuesday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, here at Facebook and YouTube, Accidental Talmudist. Have a terrific night, my holy sisters and brothers.